Ladies and gents, welcome back. It's always good to see when advocacy groups come about. We've had many instances where people's rights were trampled on over the past few years. And well, when we see new players in the game, I love to showcase them. And well, since 2001, Free to Fly has been out there, and I didn't hear about them until recently. And well, I reached out and I said, well, why don't you guys come on and we can showcase what you're doing. So today, Greg Hill is here to talk to me about that. Greg Hill, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Clyde, really appreciate the honor of being on with you.
Well, I appreciate you coming and talking with me. So help me understand what is it that you have put together here. I understand this is an advocacy group for Canadians coast to coast to have the freedom to travel and fly freely. I understand you're a pilot with a major airline, and you're together with other people in the industry pushing for this fight across Canada.
Yeah, well, it was born in 2021, really. My epiphany, I guess, as far as COVID was back in 2020. Just looking at the data and trying to figure out why we were doing some of the things that seemed really crazy that we were doing. But then as we stepped into 2021, I thought, hey, we're in the travel industry. We're going to be on the pointy end of any kind of a mandate that comes out. So it started with just a handful of airline pilots. We actually contacted the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom, very kindly got on a call with them, and they started our somewhat troubling education on the reality of what our charter is and is not. It's more not than many of us really thought that it was. And out of that, it kind of morphed quite rapidly. We positioned ourselves trying to be a calm voice in the midst of chaos, much like the archetype of the seasoned airline pilot. When the wing's on fire, you're not curled up, kind of sucking your thumb. You're calmly actioning a checklist and getting yourself safely on the ground. And there's a lot of noise and a lot of stress, I think, right now. We've tried to be a calm but an honest voice, not being unrealistic about the reality of the really troubling trajectory that we're on. So we positioned ourselves not just for aviation professionals, as I call them, that can be pilots, flight attendants, mechanics, air traffic control, and you name it, but also for the many Canadians that were barred their access across the country, which is one thing if you live in Belgium. It's very different if you live in Canada, obviously. So we've got about 37,000 passengers as part of our group as well who joined up, and it provided support that I'm sure you saw as well, where people thought, man, I thought I was the only one that thought this way, and then they discover, oh, there's other people that are very much in the same boat. So a big chunk of our aviation professionals lost their job because of the mandate. Many of the passengers did as well. So we were able to hear those stories, to share in it to a certain extent, but also advocate for a lot of what was happening. For instance, the cross-border ban going down to the States, where strangely we were freer to travel up here than we were to go south of the border. We did a fair bit of advocacy work with some of the congressmen and senators and otherwise down in the States, and finally saw that ban lifted.
Well, I see by the website here, and I'll share it on the screen so everybody can see. You have a lot of different things put together. I like this declare your courage portion of the site, where you can go on and actually declare your courage yourself, sign away a lot. And I think this is really important, because a lot of people, when it came to the pandemic, during that whole time, there was a lot of people that were afraid to speak out publicly. They had a lot to lose. A lot of the people who did come out publicly maybe were perceived in the media as like crazies or loons, and a lot of people were like, well, there's not a lot of professionals coming out, and advocacy groups started to spring up, and it's amazing to see people in this industry advocating for, well, precisely this, and everybody sticking their neck out and putting themselves in a declaration. What brought this whole idea about?
Well, I appreciate you highlighting, because it's probably the one piece on our website. There's a fair bit there. We're actually in the midst of revamping it, because it's a little more jumbled up than we'd like it. But there's resources there, from helping people that have vax injury, contacting Transport Canada over ongoing issues with our safety concerns and otherwise. But this piece here is probably the most important one as far as I'm concerned. A lot of time when we're working with an organization or in the social media sphere, we're quite concerned about social metrics and the numbers and the followers. And I can honestly say that's not something that I'm concerned about at this stage. And I think we've all grown and changed over the past 3 years. I'm very much not the man that I was 3 years ago, and I mean that in a very good way. People say, "Oh, it must have been hard losing your job," and I say, "Yeah, the lack of a paycheck was a challenge." But the beauty of it is my personal faith has never been stronger.
Mm.
The ties that I have with people have never been, as we've transitioned through some difficult times. So this declare your courage was really born out of asking myself, what do we do next? Because there's so much information being thrown at us to the point where it's paralyzing, I think, for some people. It's just bad news after bad news after bad news. And people say, well, what am I supposed to do? And to me, it's living with integrity, which means that what you say in a private chat with like-minded people also informs how you confront the lies around you on a day-to-day basis, which is actually much, much more difficult than speaking amongst a like-minded backslapping, yeah, you go crowd, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what this declare your courage is really about. It says all sorts of things that I will not do this. I will do that. You know, if I'm forced to take an act that would violate my conscience, I will refuse. And there's great value, and I would argue absolute necessity in determining where those lines are ahead of time. Because if you keep pushing the line and pushing the line and pushing the line, all of a sudden you find yourself in a place where you've violated your conscience, and it's very difficult to go back across that line. Whereas if ahead of time you say, if I'm bound by my company to attest to ABC that violates my conscience, I'm telling myself right now, in August of 2023, I will say no, and I will lose my job over it if I need to. Because I do firmly believe that the only way to turn around the trajectory of our country is for a courageous group of men and women, and it doesn't have to be a majority. It just needs to be whatever the number is. The lessons of history show us that small groups of determined people can change the course of a nation. That courageous group of men and women need to decide now that they're willing to lose their reputation, perhaps their employment, their security, their home, whatever it happens to be. And I don't mean that in some desire for some sort of sacrificial martyrdom for the sake of it, but the tyrants lose power over you when you don't hold these things tightly anymore.
Mm.
And that's where it was born out of.
Well, I heard an interesting quote recently, and it was the antithesis of courage is not cowardice; it's compliance. And this is kind of what Canadians got used to doing, just complying with this, saying no and saying you're not going to just go along with everything. That is ultimately courage. And I like this one thing. So this is from your organization. These are these luggage tags that you can put on your luggage here, and it's on the website, and it's by donation, which I find is interesting. I take it you don't make a whole lot from these. It's more just a way of starting conversations with perfect strangers, I guess. Is that the idea?
Yeah. I mean, it's a combination of both. Within our industry, I can think of a couple times where I rolled onto the airplane because the majority of us, not all of us, but the majority of us have been back to work since the mandate, so around October of last year. So I'll roll into the airplane and I'll see a flight attendant with the same luggage tag, and all of a sudden you have this sort of shivery moment where you're like, oh, this is fantastic. You know this person has the same convictions as you, and you have a wonderful moment of conversation. But it's also, just as you said, Clyde, it's also I've had some interesting conversations with people. I'll fly with a guy for several days, and then finally he sees it sitting behind the seat there, and he's like, what's that tag all about? And sometimes we've already talked because it's come up, but if it hasn't, then you get to have a conversation. And those are, people sort of say, wow, it must be super awkward because we're kind of locked in a closet for hours at a time with each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if the person is really, really opposed, then they just don't say anything. But I've had some really good conversations. Some guys say, man, I'm so proud of you. I wish I could have done the same. I just couldn't afford to lose my job. Or other times I've had some good conversations where guys they hadn't really spent a lot of time thinking about it. And now they've started to critically think about partly the mandate, but also other issues that are going on in society that some people it's just not their personality to think critically and to ask questions. So it is a conversation starter as well as an ability to be like, hey, looks like that guy probably thinks similar to me on a lot of issues, which is a welcome respite from the crazy world around us, right?
Well, I think that's amazing because, well, you don't know who's got what opinions. You don't wear them. We don't all wear them on our sleeves, but it's good to actually introduce people to new ideas. And in doing that, I mean, because we have a corporate and government run media that is virtually a propaganda machine. So a lot of people have been not introduced to a lot of these ideas, and it takes people going out of their way to introduce them. And I think this is a great way to do this. Now, the website is free to fly. Donations can be given right to the website. You guys have a lot of things going on, including a lawsuit, a class action lawsuit, I believe it is.
Yeah, so we've got a class action lawsuit. It's been filed. We're heading into to certification in the fall, probably. So that's it was filed a couple months ago. It's taken a unique angle strategically. We did wait quite some time, probably a year, and watched a lot of what's happening with the judiciary in this country. It's deeply troubling. I would say the courts have largely taken a side. So it's quite difficult to actually find something sort of that you think, hey, this is unique and this is something that may be viable. So the first big hurdle will be class certification, and that's coming up. We're hoping this fall.
Well, that sounds good. I'll make sure everyone has a link in the description where you can go check out the website. Please go out and donate. Always for a good cause, for people with good hearts and good reason to be doing what they're doing. Greg Hill, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, thanks so much, Clive.